Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's public assurance meeting on the 24th of February. It's good to be doing yet another one of these, and just really to welcome, first of all, our new Chief Constable, Chris Haward, who was appointed at the back end of last year, but this is your first PAM meeting. So congratulations on your appointment publicly for the meeting, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to tell us about your thoughts about strategy moving forward. But welcome to the meeting, Chris.
Thank you.
Moving into the agenda proper, have we got any apologies?
No, we've had no apologies, Commissioner.
Excellent. So we're a full house today, moving into the welcome introduction from myself. Well, as I say, I've already welcomed and introduced the Chief Constable. It's been an interesting journey setting up the PAM meetings. It's given us a good opportunity to actually make public some of the discussions we have and explain to the public exactly what goes on across the county to keep them safe, and equally deal with some of the more challenging areas that present themselves. So I'm sure as you move forward with this, Chief, you'll find value in it, and it's a good opportunity to obviously let the public know exactly what you are doing across the force. But moving on to our next section, Police and Crime Commissioner's update. Well, the only thing I would say by way of update is that it's really clear that the COVID situation continues to go on, and a huge thank you to all of our emergency services and frontline staff who are out there on a daily basis keeping the public safe, and equally to our health colleagues who we obviously know have been under tremendous stress and strain in supporting both the COVID situation and their other business as well. Hopefully we can all see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, although, as I'm sure many will appreciate, the easing of lockdown presents a different set of challenges, particularly for policing. And I think it's really important as partners, as we move forward with local government, health and everybody else, that we work together to make sure that the easing of lockdown goes as smoothly as possible to keep all of our residents safe and well as we transition into what we hope will be the opening of our economy, our pubs and everything else again. But I've nothing else to add. I would just move on, Aubrey, to the public questions. I understand we have some questions. Are you going to read those out for us?
Yep, I'll read those out, Commissioner. We've had two questions from the public. The first one is on the subject of Neighbourhood Watch, and it's from Mr. Alan Paul, who's the chair of Peterborough Neighbourhood Watch. I was recently informed that Lincolnshire Police no longer support the use of Neighbourhood Watch. I should be grateful if the Chief Constable could confirm and explain the force's position and how this will be communicated to the residents of Lincolnshire.
Okay, thank you, Aubrey. Over to you, Chris, for that one.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Aubrey. So the position we're in is that, sadly, as we went through austerity and money was tight, we obviously had to focus on the frontline operational response. And one of the posts that we lost during that period was the watch coordinator. That was in the belief that Neighbourhood Watch could benefit by being more closely aligned to the national Neighbourhood Watch community rather than being run at a local level with a local watch coordinator, which is a common practice across other forces. I think what we recognise is that that's left a gap now in the close liaison between Neighbourhood Watch and Lincolnshire Police. And the Safer Together team members have been doing some scoping to see how we can better manage and support local Neighbourhood Watch in the future. And we want to put Neighbourhood Watch back in a position where it's able to sustain itself at a local level and again forge those closer relationships with the force. So I think it's a very timely question and a very good question. And as we move through with our National Police Officer Uplift, we will work to look at how we can do this and revitalise some of the watch schemes. And we'll be asking one of the chief inspectors to take this on and work closely with the Safer Together team and strengthen that community resilience. So it's a work in progress. There's no immediate answer to it, but my commitment as a Chief Constable is to neighbourhood policing and we will seek to bolster that relationship with the Neighbourhood Watch schemes again.
Thank you for that answer. I think that makes clear that there is a commitment there to the longer term to communities, not just Neighbourhood Watch, but in that general sense around the value of neighbourhood policing. And I think that will be really welcomed by residents, and we'll obviously want to support you with that from the Safer Together team as well, to make sure that you can have as great a reach into communities as possible. Aubrey, the second question.
Yep. The second question is Martin Chambers in Boston, and the subject is roads police. Why is a new team needed to be dedicated in the county? What's the roads policing team doing if not policing the roads?
Okay, I'm assuming you're taking this, Chief, but obviously it can be answered by any number of people on your team, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay, I'll take it first up. It's a good question. I think the first thing I'd start by saying is that we don't have a dedicated roads policing unit in Lincolnshire at the moment, which may answer the first bit around why is a new team needed, because there isn't one at the moment. And the reason for this is that actually we went through a period where we were in collaboration with three other forces in the East Midlands. In that team, and what we'll see over the past year and go on to 14 years, there's been 48 deaths and in excess of 360 seriously injured accidents where people have been hospitalised and probably facing life. Is that we see a large influx of travelling criminals coming in, either to commit traditional crimes on us or to commit rural crime, particularly around hare coursing, lead theft and heritage crimes that we need to try and address. And we need to do something to deny those criminals the use of our roads and the ability to move freely between our borders. So the intention is to build our resilience. It has been part of the policing precept uplift to dedicate some resource to roads policing. So in answer to it, why is it needed? It's to keep people safe, to stop criminals causing harm in our communities. Why do we need to do this now? Because we haven't got one. And in answer to what is the current roads policing unit doing, there isn't one. Which is why we need to establish this as a matter of priority and make sure that we are keeping people safe in Lincolnshire.
So that concludes the two public questions and moves us on to the focus report, which is the new strategic vision for Lincolnshire Police, which again, Chief, is over to you.
Okay, what I am going to try and do here, and this is at a risk of it all crashing again, is just share my screen so at least people can see what I'm referring to, because it has been changing on a regular basis. So I'm hoping this will work. There's nothing turned up, has there? Can anybody see anything at the moment?
Yes, I can see that.
Right, it's obviously taking its time with different people. Right, okay, is it on the first screen? Yeah. Okay, so I will try and take people through this bit by bit. So this is really about the my vision and where I would hope to take Lincolnshire Police over the coming 5 years. It is work that's ongoing between myself and the Chief Officer team and the rest of the organisation, and is subject to ongoing consultation, with a planning day on Friday with a view to a first draft of the strategy and delivery plan coming out of that planning day, and a final version of it at the end of March when there's another planning day. This is changing, as I say, daily, and I think, Adam, you've received probably half a dozen copies of it in the last 2 days, just to show that it is developing. And the first slide there, it sets out where we started from when I first arrived, and the pitch I made to the Commissioner about being Chief Constable, which was the why we're here. The vision and the mission is really about working together to make Lincolnshire the safest place to live, work and visit. Key parts in that is the together piece. This is not about the police operating alone and independently, but it's about working with our partners, with our communities, and with everybody who may have a part to play in keeping people safe. But the ambition and the aspiration is to take us from where we're currently at, which is against crime survey figures and ONS figures, the 15th safest place in England and Wales at the moment to live, to being the actual safest place to live, work and visit in the country. So that's the aspiration that we're striving for. It started with stop crime and criminals, help those in need and protect from harm, surrounded by 5 pillars: partnership, people, innovation, communities and purpose. But as a result of the consultation, where we've come down to, and we'll be pitching tomorrow to the organisation in the planning day, is a refined version of that, which is still very much about the vision and mission is about working together and making Lincolnshire the safest place to live, work and visit. But there's the amendment around stop crime to stop crime and antisocial behaviour, because it's recognition of the wider aspect of policing that we've got to think about. It's still about helping people in need and protecting people from harm. So the stop crime and antisocial behaviour is very much about how we react and respond to those incidents and how we hold people to account, and how we work with our communities to keep them safe. The second part about protecting people from harm is the proactive element about how do we build resilient communities that are safe from crime and are safe from antisocial behaviour and safe from vulnerability and exploitation. So very much the crime prevention, target hardening, community engagement, community resilience. And then the third part to this is about helping people in need. So where crime does happen, or where people are exploited, or where people are in crisis, how do we reach out and make sure that they're looked after, and how do we make sure that they're lifted out of that vulnerability and taken into safety, and that victimisation or repeat exploitation is prevented in the future. So that's at the very heart of what we're trying to do, and it's about keeping the message as simple as we possibly can, so everybody in our communities understands why we're here, and everybody who works for Lincolnshire Police, whether that's Lincolnshire Police, G4S and our partners, understands what our primary purpose is and our reason for being. That will be supported by 5 strands, and you can see these have changed from the first slide, which are now still about people as a priority, still partners and communities and how we work with those. But what we have changed is the innovation piece has become about culture and where we take this. And then what we've moved from is the one that said purpose has now become capability, because I think what we've concluded is the 3 things in the middle: stop crime, help those in need and protect from harm, are our purpose. And the capability is really making sure that we have the skills and resources to deliver against those. So in terms of where we go from here, is the success criteria has been drafted as follows. So on stop crime and antisocial behaviour, we're looking for a sustained success in reducing reported and recorded overall crime and antisocial behaviour over the next 5 years. This is not a 6 month to 1 year plan. This is about making sure that we put in sustainable solutions that live beyond our tenure as chief officers and live beyond the tenure of some of our middle and senior officers and senior staff in the organisation. So we move beyond self-interest and small initiatives into something that will stand the test of time. Looking for sustained reductions in offending in line with our integrated offender management strategy. So trying to reduce that repeat offender and those entering into a life of crime and trying to divert them away from it. And making sure, and you'll see this is a common thread in all 3 of these, making sure that we have a workforce who are knowledgeable, confident, skilled and equipped in crime investigation or problem solving in the second one, or complex needs and vulnerable people. So making sure that our workforce know what they need to do and how to do that, and making sure that we invest time and training and give them the space and the knowledge to develop their skills. In terms of protecting people from harm, again, it's about resilient communities. I've touched on that in the first couple of slides, and making sure people feel protected from harm and feel safe, and the sustained reduction in repeat victimisation and vulnerability. So how do we lift people out of that vulnerable situation, and how do we stop them becoming victims over and over again? And again, that has to be work with our communities, with our partners, and making sure that we bring all of our assets to bear on this, and we have a whole system approach to helping people. And then helping people in need is the final strand of this, or the final one of the three purposes. And success will be about making sure that we're very people focused, that we offer the highest standards of care, and that leads to sustained reductions in repeat calls for service. That builds upon strong partnerships with common goals, and making sure that we are working with partners, not from a parochial and single-minded point of view where we're looking to push work out and across to other organisations, but working with our partners and looking at where we have common and igniting purposes, and where we can work together to help each other to find pathways out of vulnerability and out of victimisation for those people most in need. But again, that comes with training, that comes with skilling up our people and making sure that we have the right people working in those environments. Moving on, in terms of our purpose, so stopping crime and antisocial behaviour, protecting from harm and helping people in need, our key indicators, and this isn't a definitive list, this is just those that we see as the key indicators that would indicate the health of the organisation and whether we're making progress. We'll be very much focused on reductions in overall crime and antisocial behaviour, but there will be a focus on higher end murder, serious violence and the neighbourhood crime, as well as antisocial behaviour. These are all factors that will play into funding from national government and grant funding for Lincolnshire Police, and will also help around some of the priorities around serious violence. We'll be looking at the Crime Survey of England and Wales and the Office of National Statistics rankings, so that should be ONS rather than OSN. And one thing that we're not doing at the moment is we'll be looking at how we compare against our most similar force family, and making sure that we are keeping pace with the best practice in policing, and hopefully setting the pace more and more as time goes on. We'll be looking at reoffending rates, the positive outcomes, so whether this is about charge or whether it's about fixed penalty notices, and when we go into the Chief's report, you'll see that there's more about positive outcomes there. But also keeping a close ear to our own people and how they feel about how we're delivering the service, and how we as a chief officer team and a leadership team are looking after their welfare, their well-being, and making sure they are trained and equipped to do their job to the best of their ability. In terms of protecting people from harm, it shouldn't be any surprise that the measures here will be about repeat victimisation and the vulnerability index, but importantly about public confidence and feelings of safety, and making sure that our communities do feel safe and see the difference and feel the difference that we're making over the coming years. But again, that has to be supported by collaboration, and we'll seek to introduce a collaboration maturity assessment to make sure that wherever we do enter into collaboration or partnership, it is actually delivering against the aims and the objectives we set out, and is delivering tangible benefits for our communities. And then in helping those people in need, it's about repeat calls for service, and making sure that where we do find people who are vulnerable or exploited, that they don't need to call on us again, because we've managed to solve the problems and take them away from that position of vulnerability. And HMIC will obviously have a part to play in their feedback, and our victim code compliance, and again our staff survey as well as the user satisfaction surveys will play into that. The next part in this, and this is where the 5 strands, so if I go back to, I'm hoping this is working, you can now see the circles again, can you? I've not gone through the circles. Slide 1. You're still on slide 1, okay, it's obviously not moving. Bear with me then. So, okay, yeah, so this, unfortunately, it's a slightly different. Yeah, so the presentation that's on the screen there is slightly different to the one I was going to talk about. So what I'll carry on with where I was, and we'll leave it on slide 1 so people can follow that. It's obviously not come through as the next one. So the strands that fall under this on the slide you've got, as I said earlier, you will have communities, purpose, partnership, people and innovation. That has changed, as I say, to communities, people, partners, culture and capability as a result of the consultation we've been through. And they're the strands that we'll be working on. In terms of people, as the top strand within all of this, the success criteria effectively reads as: we will have a diverse, skilled and confident workforce who feel valued, empowered and cared for. We will have a healthy, happy and engaged workforce, and we will have leaders, brackets, supervisors and managers at all levels that are fair, consistent and demonstrate the values of the organisation. And what then falls underneath that is the start of the delivery plan, which is presented at the moment for tomorrow's planning session as a list, really. It will be developed into a plan. And within that, when we're talking about a diverse and skilled workforce, things that we've got to do is think about our baseline assessment of what we've got now and where our gaps are around diversity and skills, what the training needs assessment might look like. The equality, diversity and inclusion peer review needs to be conducted to make sure that we understand our baseline position, but also where we need to get to. And then we need to think about how we identify and address barriers to recruitment, retention and progression. In terms of, I'm not going to go through all of these lists, I'm just going to pick out some of them, otherwise we'll be here all afternoon. But in terms of a healthy, happy and engaged workforce, there's a lot of work that's been going on through Andrew White, the ACO, around wellbeing, and it's about developing the people and wellbeing strategy and the work that's already in place. Seeking to put in some protected CPD time and core training time and maximising our opportunities around that, and trying to give people a voice so that they feel heard and cared for in the organisation. So about our internal engagement strategy and how we're going to listen to our people and what we do with that information when it comes in, as well as stronger and more consistent establishment management and resource allocation. And that last part will fit into our capability strand, which I'll touch on in a moment. Elements under the leaders and fair, consistent and working to the values of the organisation is about developing a talent management programme and leadership training and development, as well as a PDR system that adds value and makes sure that we are promoting and nurturing the best people in the organisation, either into specialist roles or for leadership roles in the future. And making sure that our cultures and values are embedded in all that we do. And again, that will feed into the culture piece that we'll speak about in a moment. The next strand is about working with our partners, and success in this field is very much about having partnerships that complement and support each other's strategic objectives. It's about having effective partnerships that tackle the most complex community issues and vulnerability. And it's about having trusting and collaborative partnerships. So the first strand about partnerships that complement and support each other is understanding what our capacity is and capability is, understanding where our partners' capability and capacity is, and where the gaps exist between all of those, and where there may be common opportunities for us to work together, and making sure that we then develop work that is already going on through Chief Superintendent Di Coulson and in the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership is completing that review and developing a 3 to 5 year route map about where we want collaboration and partnership to go, so we're all aiming in the same direction and making sure that we maximise those opportunities to work together with those common goals. Internally, it is about us developing our whole system approach and making sure we use all of the assets in the organisation to the best of our ability, but also then looking at how we might leverage support from others outside of policing and how we might support them. Part of that is about the development of a strategic threat and risk assessment and a comprehensive control strategy that will allow us to prioritise our work and our assets and our efforts, and making sure again that there are consistent and clear pathways for those people in need. So where does the role of policing begin and end? And when the policing role ends, what are the pathways for those people who might be vulnerable or being victimised? What are the pathways that they have to make sure that they have support beyond the world of policing? And vice versa, that may be about where probation services begin and end, and how the police service then step in to support that, or how health service step in, or how we step in to support health as well. This is not a one-way option. And in terms of that latter part about it not being a one-way option, that's what would then build the trust and confidence in those collaborative partnerships, and making sure that we have that collaborative mindset to maximise the value from working in partnership, and making sure that we identify the opportunities through blue light collaboration or other partnerships. And one of the elements that has to come with this, and speaking from experience of having worked in collaboration for a lot of my services, it isn't something that comes naturally. It's something that you need to learn, and you need to be trained in, and you need to understand. And we need to think about how we're going to get the best people with the best training and the best skills into those collaborations and partnerships, so that we do get maximum benefit, not just for us, but for other organisations who might come into that partnership. The third strand I'll talk about then is communities, which links into working with partners as well. But this is about listening to and understanding the diverse needs of our communities. It's about building trust and confidence in our communities, in the service that we deliver, and we'll work with our communities to develop and deliver a sustainable solution to empower them to be more resilient themselves. Because when you start to look at the evidence around the most resilient communities, they are communities that are able to run and develop and manage the solutions themselves, albeit some of that may be enabled and empowered through policing or other partners. Once the community owns the problem and owns the solution, it is always more resilient and more powerful as a result. So in terms of listening and understanding, lots of work already goes on around this one, and it's about continuing that communication and engagement to understand the priorities of our communities and their bespoke needs where we have more diverse communities, and being able to communicate in a way which reaches different audiences. It's about being accessible, and it's about making sure that our services are accessible to people with different needs, and making sure that we have information and advice readily available to people, and clear standards of service which they can hold us to account for. Where I'd like to be as well is to make sure that we're working positively and proactively with external communication, so our communities and our public can see what we're doing and know what we're doing and gain confidence from that. But they can also see that we're being timely and appropriate with our response to their calls for service and meeting their needs. One of the things I do want to develop, and thankfully because of the precept decision a couple of weeks ago, we will be looking to bring in a community crime action team, which will be very much focused on the rural crime strategy, trying to dedicate resources, police officers, police staff and volunteers to tackling some of the problems that blight our more rural communities, things like hare coursing, heritage theft, and plant theft and things like that. So we're looking to develop that. It's not going to happen overnight because obviously it requires recruitment, it requires training, it requires equipment, but it is going to happen, and it will be one of the priority pieces on the agenda for the coming year. In terms of the final part on communities, it is understanding what makes a community resilient. So working with our communities, working with the universities and the East Midlands Academic Consortium, we've got to think about what it is, what are the factors that make communities more resilient, one community more resilient over another, and how do we take an evidence-based policing approach to bring in solutions that will build that resilience across Lincolnshire. And hopefully that will start to lead to identified funding and resourcing to support that through either government initiatives or other funding streams that we can then tap into to help support some of these initiatives as we move forward. And one of the things I would want to do, and for any large organisations listening, is to start to think about how we can work together with our large private sector organisations around corporate social responsibility and partnering with them to try and make our communities safer and stronger. But the main aim of all of this is to empower and support our communities to develop and embed their own solutions. And if we can get to that point, then we will have resilient communities who have better outcomes and better choices and better futures. The third part that I'll talk about, the fourth part is culture. And this replaces on the slide you're looking at the innovation piece, because what we felt was innovation actually sits within the cultural element. But this strand is about making sure that we value diversity and difference and the positive benefits this brings. It's making sure that we are passionate and proud about the quality and standard of service we deliver, and that we celebrate and encourage innovation and learning. So the first part about diversity and difference is looking at where we're at now and the resourcing that we have across our diversity and inclusion team. I do want to invest more in that, because at the moment it's not enough to deliver where we want to be, and we need to show more activity and more energy and more direction in this field. Again, there's a gap analysis and causal assessment that needs to be conducted, and what I want to create really by that investment is a diversity task force to look at all of the barriers to why we might struggle to recruit people from different backgrounds, why we might struggle to retain them, particularly where people are English as a second language, but also from our Black and Asian minority groups, but also why do we not see women progressing through the organisation at the same rate that we might see their male colleagues moving through. So what are all those barriers to inclusion and progression, retention in the organisation? It's also about thinking about where we go post-COVID and how we create a much more agile, accessible and flexible working environment. There are real opportunities coming out of COVID about changing the way we structure ourselves, changing the offer of employment, which means we can improve our reach into our communities. It means we can improve our reach into some of our more diverse communities because of being able to offer a different place of employment and a different role. One of the things we are looking at already, and the Deputy Chief Constable Jason Harwin has this, as does the ACC Kerrin Wilson, both working on our recovery from COVID, is actually what's the environment going to look like in the future and what's our offer going to be. So that work is already ongoing. And one of the things I also want to introduce is something I've done in the past. It's a scheme just called Walk a Mile, which is really about giving people time and space to go and meet somebody within the organisation or even within our communities potentially, who comes from a different background, to go and talk to them, not about what their role is, but about what their experiences are and why their background has influenced how they've got to where they are, either in a positive or a negative way, to build that understanding in those positive relationships. We're also going through at the moment a large cultural survey for the organisation, which will help us to define our values and behaviours going forward and define our standards and expectations. But it will also help to make sure that our reward and recognition process is based upon that organisational, operational and creative excellence and effort, and is firmly set in those values and behaviours. And then in terms of celebrating and encouraging innovation and learning, I want to get to a position where we are encouraging all of our people to be creative, and as long as they're thinking about what the right thing is to do, and they've got ideas, that they are given the space and the time and encouraged to try new things and be prepared to fail sometimes, but pick themselves up and try again, because it's through that fast approach that we will see true innovation and true improvement coming. And one of the elements I want to bring in, but will require some training and support for innovation, is around 30, 60, 90 and 120-day challenges, where we're encouraging everybody in the organisation to take on areas where they can see improvements in service occurring, and take responsibility and ownership for driving those forwards, either in that 30 to 120-day period. So we see it happening very, very quickly. Excuse me. And the final strand here is capability, which replaces on the slide that you've got, it replaces the purpose element. As we say, the purpose is really the three core things in the centre, and the capability is those capabilities that we need to then deliver against those three. And the success criteria for this will be an effective intelligence and information. Sorry, we will have effective intelligence and information to support good decision making and resource allocation. We will understand our demand, threat, harm and opportunities, and we will understand our capability and capacity to meet that demand and meet those threats and maximise our opportunities to improve our service. So the work that's already ongoing is things like development of CLIC, so business information tools, making sure that we have clear and complementary role definitions across our functions, and our intelligence collection plan is based upon our key priorities, not just our key priorities, but those of our partners and those that we're in collaboration with as we develop those partnerships and collaborations. It is also about effective tasking and coordination, and making sure that we have robust and ethical crime recording practices. And a lot of work that is already ongoing around, particularly when you look at our contact management and force control room, about transforming our digital platform and making sure that we start to move into an artificial intelligence stroke machine learning environment where we are relying on computers really to do much more of the legwork that we might otherwise have police staff and police officers having to do themselves. We want to make sure that we're looking over the horizon. I've talked about this being a 5-year plan, so we need to be looking ahead, and we need to be thinking about what we're going to need, not just in the next 6 months, but what we're going to need in the next 5 years. And that's particularly true when we start to think about the IT landscape and digital intelligence, digital investigation, digital communication, policing in the virtual world, and the very fact that, you know, as a parent of 2, my children are far more vulnerable on their computers and their devices than they are walking down the street. So how do we address that, and how do we make sure that we're keeping people as safe in the virtual world as we would aim to do in the real world? And then understanding our own capability and capacity to meet that demand and maximise opportunities is about making sure we've done our capability assessment against those emerging and existing threats, and those that are probably a bit further over the horizon, that we understand our capacity to meet those threats against the control strategy priorities, and that we have a clear plan to mitigate any gaps in our capability and or capacity. An element of this has to be about how we're going to maximise the use of volunteers and specials. We are a small force. We continue to fight for better funding, but we are in a healthy position this year and hopefully for the coming years around our funding. But we could still use more, and we will continue to strive for more. But that does mean that we need to make sure that we use our volunteers and specials effectively and in a way that they feel valued as well. So I do want to maximise that element of our business. And again, it's a clear prioritisation of assets against risk and opportunity. And one thing we will be looking to bring in as part of a new governance structure is a capability management board, which as it stands at the moment will be chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable. At that point, I'm going to stop talking because I think I've covered everything, and open up to questions and drink a bit of very tepid coffee.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think what's really clear to me that like most things, it's really clear that a lot of work has gone into something when there's not that many words attached to it, because it takes a lot of effort to condense the message down into those really important elements that makes it understandable, not just in the forum that we're in, but equally as it goes down the organisation. So anybody wishing to engage with it and understand the strategy will be clear about what you are asking of the organisation. I think that's really important, and it's great to see. And certainly, you know, it's very much simpler for me as the public's representative to support you in delivering your strategy when I can see quite clearly how that links directly to the policing crime plan and how it's going to keep communities safe. And I know there will be a lot of other work that will now go on beneath that as you move into the delivery elements, so understanding what your specific plans around all your areas of business will be to deliver your strategy. So I understand there's a lot more work there to follow. But just to commend you, really. I mean, you've been in your role now what will seem to you like 5 years, but is only a matter of a few weeks, and that's a significant step forward into delivering that new strategy. So, I think that's really good to see, particularly as we're at the point of setting the budget now and actually looking forward for the next 12 months. I would sort of throw it open whether anybody that's in the meeting has got any specific questions, comments they want to make at this stage. Okay, I suppose the obvious question to me is, and never being satisfied with the fact that somebody's done a great piece of work, when will the next elements be available for us to see, which obviously will be those pieces that we will discuss throughout the year in our governance meetings about, whether it's the fleet strategy, the estate strategy, the people plan, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Firstly, I should, as I was going through the presentation, I should have really referenced how they were going to link back into the police and crime plan. But the next part of this will be, as we draft up the strategy and delivery plan here, we will make the deliberate reference across to the police and crime plan, so you can see how the two complement each other. And that was always in the thinking, and it just hasn't come out in that presentation. Had I gone through the slides and shown you those, you would have seen the links at the bottom, and how we're going to make sure that tie-in is there. So the next steps in terms of what you're asking, Commissioner, is we go into the planning session on Friday. That will start to make sure that we haven't got any glaring omissions there, that there's no glaring fallout over some of the things that are put in, because this needs to be something that is owned by the whole organisation and the whole of the leadership team. It will then also seek to prioritise and basically put all of the things that I've mentioned into a high, medium and low priority categorisation. That isn't necessarily about putting them into a timeline, because we may have high, medium and low work going on at the same time. It just means that where we're tight on resources, we will prioritise the high risk and the high priority areas, and maybe leave some of the low stuff alone for a while. But some of the low priority things may be low hanging fruit that actually it makes sense to get on and do those immediately. So that's what's going to happen on Friday. What we'll then do is draft that up into the first proper copy of the strategy and delivery plan, which will then be shared across the organisation and with yourself, Commissioner, and your office. And we aim, I think it's around the 23rd or 24th of March, I think, is the final planning meeting. By that time, we will have what I hope to be pretty much a final version of it to sign off there, which will then allow us to then publish that and say this is the plan and this is the direction of travel moving into the next financial year. There's a lot of work that then falls underneath that, as you say, around developing the estate strategy, fleet strategy to support this plan. And that will fit under what will be a new governance structure that we're currently just working through at the moment.
Okay, now no Malcolm wants to come in, but there's one thing I wanted to just add. I mean, as part of those strategies, I think it's really important that you and I work together to deliver a sustainability strategy as part of this, because obviously I know that will obviously influence fleet, estates, everything else. But I think having a really clear statement on behalf of ourselves to be clear what our commitment is around sustainability and that direction of travel will be really important. So I would just sort of put that on the radar as being a piece of work I'd like to sort of add into the overall, if that's agreeable to you.
Yeah, and actually I think it is already in there somewhere. It's maybe just one of the bullet points in the list of things that I've not covered, but it is work in progress and it will sit firmly within this plan. Yeah. Thank you.
Malcolm, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to welcome in particular the way the Chief set out his stall in relation to the partnership landscape. It's an area where a broader strategic approach is needed. And I just say it's an area, of course, where as a office supporting the Police and Crime Commissioner in Lincolnshire, we have many links in the partnership space as well. So we need to make sure that we're working alongside you as we develop that going forward. It's not just a local authority thing, it's not just a policey thing, it's all of us together. And whether those links are into integrated offender management or into mental health. You know, we need to activate all those links, which means that for the partnership piece, at least, we need to make sure we've got a good forum for building that in the round together to get the best out of it. But I very much welcome the way you've set out the stall, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, whether there's anybody else that wants to contribute on this section. I can see no further hands, but I think it's clear that that's a huge step forward, and you know, obviously we look forward to working with you as plans develop to move into the next stage. So thank you for presenting that today, and on that we'll move into the final section, which is the integrated performance report. Now, I don't know if you're leading again on this, Chief, or whether you're putting somebody else in the hot seat. I'll leave that to you.
I think I'm leading on it, but to give my voice a break, I'll probably bring my chief officer team in at various points. We're all kind of socially distanced in the same room, so they'll probably put their hand up and jump in where they need to. But I'll lead us into it, and forgive me if I go off piste a little bit compared to what you're used to. It's the first time I've delivered this piece, so I will take positive and constructive feedback on my delivery as we go along. So my chief officer team are now holding scorecards up in the background already. So if we go to page 3, which is just the data that sits above our crime and antisocial behaviour indicators. I'm not going to dwell on this page for too long because I will cover it as I go through the rest of the report. But the positive news in here is if we take all crimes, we're looking at a 12-month reduction of 13.3%. We obviously need to keep that in the context of where COVID is, and we'll touch on some of that later on. Elements that I'd highlight is the residential burglary piece, again 13% reduction, which means that fewer people are being subjected to that breach of their privacy and that intrusion into their privacy. Violence against the person with injury has also come down. I think we're relatively realistic here that that's largely due to the COVID factor, because we're not seeing the nighttime economy impact. We did see as the summer months came on last year and lockdown came out that we actually saw a spike in violence again. No surprise, as people came out and tried to party as much as they could in the short time they had between one lockdown and the next. But what you'll see on this sheet as well is, as we move down to the bottom part of page 3, is that antisocial behaviour has spiked considerably, and that is very much down to the COVID factor. So we're seeing increased reporting around breaches of COVID legislation, and I will, as we go through the report, we'll see how some of that has played out. But basically what's happened is at the beginning, it was relatively quiet. We were seeing relatively few reports per day. I think we were in the low teens on average. As the year has gone on, that's gone up. It spiked in the summer months. And then what we've seen in the most recent lockdown is we've gone into the kind of mid 40s, 45 to 50 incidents per day. So we've seen a tripling of volume of reporting per day between the first lockdown and this lockdown, because people, I think, have become less and less tolerant of people who are abusing the rules, and for good reason, because actually we're all trying to make sure this is the last time we have to lock ourselves down in this way. So what we have to say is that the data here is a 12-month rolling comparison, but it does look at where we're at against the seasonal averages based on the last 3 years. But if I just rattle through some of these, in all crime, I've already mentioned 13% down. That's 7,965 fewer offences through the year. But as I say, in June to October, we did see our crime levels going back to those that we would expect for the summer period. Overall, it's a decrease on ONS figures of 8%, so slightly different to the way we report because of the ONS data collection up to September 2020. That's against a national average of 7%. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, it puts us at 15th in the country. So when we're talking about being the safest place in the country, we're currently 15th. First part is let's get ourselves in the top 10. When we're in the top 10, then let's get ourselves in the top 3, and then let's get to number 1. And that's the aspiration. So that's where we want to be. Burglary dwelling, I've already touched on. We've seen that residential burglary has fallen, which is good news. That means less people who've obviously suffered that. And we've seen a similar fall, and in fact a slightly higher fall for business burglary of 23%. So good news on that. Violence against the person has seen, again, over the 12-month period on our stats, there's been a decrease of 9%. But we did see those figures rise again in the summer months to something that was above what we would normally expect through the summer months. And we think that was a bit of over-exuberation, shall we say, by people coming out of lockdown and a desperate need to party. And at the moment around violence, we are sitting at 18th in the country, but violence without injury is a 3% chance of becoming a victim of violence in the county, which is a very, very low percentage. And if we look at violence against a person with injury, we're actually down at less than 1% chance of that happening to anybody in the county. So very safe, and violence with injury is actually down by 15%. But again, summer peak was higher than expected levels, and the COVID factor obviously has to be considered in all of that. There is work to do again on the violence with injury piece. We're currently sitting at 22nd in the country. So quite a lot of, in terms of gaining ground and being the best, we've got work to do. But when we take it into account that it's 0.8% chance of becoming a victim of violence with injury, we are still a very safe county to live and work in and visit. Sexual offences has seen a decrease of 14%. I think my worry coming out of East Midlands Special Ops Unit and now sitting here as a Chief Constable is my worry around sexual offences and other elements of vulnerability, particularly around domestic abuse or child exploitation, is I think until we come out of lockdown, we're not really going to know what these true figures are and whether some of it is being masked by lockdown and is hidden behind closed doors now, because a lot of the referral mechanisms that we might otherwise have are not in place. So schools, hospitals and so on and so forth may not be seeing the same people coming through the door and as attuned to it as they might otherwise have been. And then the robbery figures again show 17% decrease in robbery, 9th in the country, good position, less than 0.04% chance of becoming a victim. So really happy with that position. And if we look at business robbery specifically, we've decreased by 48% in the past 12 months. So very, very positive position. There's then some stats about the drug offences, again showing decreases. It's difficult to judge that one because that's a lot of drug offences are because of proactive work by policing. That hasn't necessarily been something we could do during lockdown. However, we've had the space to do more on drug trafficking rather than drug possession, and you can see that that's had a positive impact with an increase of 11%. And then there are some theft stats as we go into the beginning of, I've lost the page numbers, 7, where you can see reductions across the board in terms of theft, bicycle theft, shoplifting and other thefts. Again, we're waiting to see what the impact of COVID has been on that one. But if I go through now into Chief's commentary, one thing I would say, there's a crime harm index, which is the last part, the beginning of page 9. That shows a decreasing trend over all of this. But it's clear that COVID-19 lockdowns have significantly reduced high harm offences. So as we come out of this, we will keep a close eye on where that harm index is taking us. In relation to the response to COVID itself, we remain committed to the 4Es approach, but I think it's fair to say that we've taken a firmer focus on the encouragement and enforcement in the recent lockdown, and trying to make sure that this is the last time we're in lockdown and that we keep people safe, particularly as the vaccination programme is rolled out, and making sure that we don't spoil it all at this, what hopefully is going to be the last hurdle. And an indication of the rise in reporting is that in the first lockdown in April, we issued 151 fixed penalty notices compared to 292 in January. So almost a doubling of the numbers of fixed penalty notices. What's worrying in there is we've seen more of our police officers being spat at and coughed on and assaulted as a result of responding to COVID incidents, which has led to a number of staff either sick or in isolation through the through the last few weeks. We have closed all but 4 of our town inquiry offices, but we remain open at South Park in Lincoln, at Boston, at Grantham and at Skegness as the main inquiry offices we have. And we are, all other stations remain fully operational, and but we just haven't opened the front counters, obviously to protect our own staff and make sure that there is no spread of the virus itself. In terms of all crime, I've covered most of these. We continue to see reductions across the board, really. Sexual offences, robbery, arson and criminal damage are where we would expect them to be, but we remain focused on violence. And then on the violent side, Operation Raptor is our response to violence across the force, and it links to weapon-enabled crime complemented with Operation Sceptre, which was focused on knife crime offences. And we've seen recorded possession of weapons has fallen. Lots and lots of work going on there. So I'll pause there if there's any questions and see whether it gives my computer time to reboot itself.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it's really clear that it's very difficult to take out of the equation the effects of what has been an extraordinary year this year, and I think it will take some time for the crime stats to really get back on an even keel so we can understand what the world looks like in a post-COVID world. And I mean, some of the areas that you highlighted, which I think were particularly important to focus on, is around the what will happen in reality when restrictions are eased. And I guess first question is how confident you are about the preparedness of the organisation when the lockdown is eased, because obviously policing has got itself very busy, focused on lots of other things, but suddenly there's going to be a nighttime economy again. Suddenly there's going to be, as you say, reports around domestic abuse, etc., etc. And so some reassurance around how you see the organisation sort of recovering from that. And just on that, I mean, we from the OPCC side, we're supporting our colleagues at local government level who are commission DA services. We've got additional funding from government and from our own budget that we're putting into supporting the domestic abuse services to make sure provision is available both now but also in that post-lockdown world. And we are funding an additional hospital domestic abuse advisor. So there are additional resources going in the partnership space to try and help residents, particularly with those crimes. But a little bit from you around that sort of going from lockdown into the post-lockdown period would be really welcome.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll hand you over to ACC Karen Wilson to begin with. But in answer to the blunt question at the beginning, Commissioner, how confident am I? I'm very confident, and Karen will now explain why I'm confident.
Thanks, Commissioner, for the question and the confidence that the Chief has in us in terms of our plans. We've, as you saw back in the summer when we had the first lockdown restrictions lifted, we were very, very well prepared in terms of understanding what the crime issues may well be, and also our resourcing commitments. And we've taken a very similar approach to the unlock plans that we've got going on at the moment. So my ops planning team are working with all of the command teams across East, West, Crime, Control Room and Specialist Operations Department to make sure that they've got very thorough and comprehensive plans in place, which will look at both resourcing to ensure that the key dates on the government's roadmap have different measures in place so that we can counter any of the particular issues that we expect to encounter. So whether it's the pubs opening from the 17th of May onwards, or whether it's the travel of outside of your area from the 29th of March onwards, we've got bespoke plans for each of those particular key dates. The other things that we have considered and are included in these plans are things like the Euros in June, to make sure that we've got enough resourcing on that, our G7 commitments and the mutual aid commitments that we've got in place to support Kent for Brexit, etc. And we've just had more mutual aid requirements that have come in today for other forces that we're supporting. So it's about ensuring that we've got the right resources in place despite these other national commitments that we have as well. The emerging crimes that we will expect to see are the increases, as you've already alluded to, in terms of domestic abuse. And we've seen them previously whenever we've had the unlock plans and the restrictions lifted. So making sure we've got enough resources for both that partnership and that pathways to support people who are reporting to us, as well as having the investigative and response capabilities available. Working with partners within the local resilience forum and our normal traditional partners around COVID marshals, and ensuring that we've got the right partnership approaches for antisocial behaviour are really key, and they're very well documented in the plans. And ensuring that we've got all of our cross-border capabilities also key to these plans as well, so that we're working with other forces. As we saw in the summer last year, we had quite a bit of cross-border activity that came into Lincolnshire from other forces of criminality, and that's reflected in some of the increases that you saw over the rolling 12 months of proactive work around county lines. All of those are very well documented in there, and happy to share some of the more sensitive issues outside of this meeting should you wish to do so. But our approach is very much still to maintain our measures around the COVID requirements of social distancing, etc., and the government's message that just because these enforcement positions have been lifted, some of the restrictions, we still will have COVID in our midst, that we're going to have to make sure that we factor into all of our plans going forward.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And as I say, as things sort of develop, I know that we obviously are in regular contact, but I think it's useful for the public to understand that you obviously are in this position where you have that level of confidence as we move into a new space with that, because I know that it is of concern to people, you know, to know that policing will be there as and when they need it. And in particular, as the nighttime economy is turned back on, then obviously that will clearly present some challenges. It always has done, and I'm sure it will do again. But note that unless anybody's got any other questions, I'm happy for us to move forward onto the next section. Yeah.
Okay, if we move on, then we're into demand and response. So I will take a little bit of a break here and hand over to ACO Andrew White, because I think this is a good news story. When we look at the uplift in performance in our call handling, so I'm going to hand on to Andrew. Andrew, I'll let you determine where you want to hand it back to me, and I'll be ready for that one. But this is a very good news story and very positive in terms of calls for service.
Thank you, Chief Constable. So in terms of call handling, I mean, it's been, in spite of the good performance, it's been a hard year for the control room. Back in March of last year, we split the control room into 3 different sites and then into 4 different sites, so that we could manage the social distancing requirements to keep the operation running 24/7, 365. But even during the peak of that, performance was maintained at good levels. And as you see from the figures within the reports, we've consistently had high contact and quick responses on 999s, as we have over the last decade in this force, and that you've often commented on that, Commissioner. But also on 101 call handling, we have had very good figures this year, and as you can see, even prior to the COVID impact, when we were in much more normal business, we were answering 3/4 of calls within 3 minutes at 101, which is a figure that would have been the envy of many police forces around the country. The control room is split again now. We moved them back into a single structure over the summer as the rates lowered with the new variants, including some minor breakouts within the control room itself. We've had to work hard to keep the operation running, thanks to fantastic support from colleagues in Public Health England when things got quite difficult for us. But we continue to provide that service, and that's done on the background as well as the continued implementation of the new command and control system, which makes additional demands on that workforce. So very proud, as I know you are, of everybody that works within the control room space for what they've done in what we will always remember as a very, very demanding year.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. If I carry on through this part, and then we'll pause at the end of this section.
Okay.
Not only is the call handling part really healthy, but our response to urgent incidents is looking very positive as well. It's where we would expect it. In fact, in some cases, it's exceeding where we would want it to be. So for urban incidents, our target is to be there within 15 minutes. We're currently achieving 14 minutes. And for rural and in a county of this size, this is a real stretch target to be there in less than 20 minutes. I'm staggered that we get there on average in 18 minutes and 39 seconds on average. I think when you look at the distances and the road network that our officers have to travel along, I think that is quite exceptional. And having come from a previous large rural force with those kind of roads, again, as Andrew said about call handling, I think that is a performance measure that we will be the envy of others for. So really, really pleased with that and proud of that one. Road traffic collisions, I touched on when we were answering the public questions. I've mentioned that we're kind of back to normal levels of volume on the road. Despite the second lockdown, we did see it drop off. Sorry, the third lockdown, we did see it drop off for a while, but it's kind of picked up from there. We're currently showing 48 people have died in the last 12 months, and as I say, over 360 people with serious injuries. That does cause me concern and will be a priority in the coming year, and will be something that we commit to over the next 5 years to make sure that we make our roads safer. So I won't dwell on that one because that covers most of the Chief's commentary, but we remain focused on the 4 biggest factors: speed, mobile phones, drug driving and seatbelts, and we'll be building on our current capability of the two plane vehicles that are in the race precinct elements of our response. So if I pause there for any questions.
Yeah, I think the key element for me is one of congratulations. I mean, as Andrew pointed out, the challenges will be something that most people will never understand how difficult it is when you say to the force control room, we're going to split you in half, then we're putting you back together, then we're splitting you in half again, and all for very good reason. But nevertheless, it's been a huge technological challenge on the back of all the other upgrade that's going on in there and the changes that are going on to improve systems even more, and for the people that are working in there to have performed at this level consistently is outstanding. It really goes to show that, you know, in policing terms, they are the shop window. They're the people that the public often, if they ring in, they're the people that are dealing with that first inquiry, and it's a very challenging, demanding job, and the outputs around that are superb. So I think they absolutely need to be commended. And as we move into another area of work, which is obviously looking at the changes as a result of the G4S contract coming to an end in March of next year, I think it's worth us saying that obviously I know it's paramount in your mind as much as mine that looking after and supporting all of the members of staff that currently are under that G4S contract is paramount in our minds as we move into that, and not least of which those that work in the force control room, to make sure that they're supported through the transition into whatever comes next, because I think it's really important to say that. And again, with the response times, you're absolutely right that there's no easy hits here. It is a demanding challenge to you know, get around Lincolnshire, 5,500 miles of road across 2,500 square miles, and they're doing a superb job in very trying times, and hopefully the uplift in officer numbers will help make it that little bit easier. But as we would clearly be aware, that takes years to go from recruiting somebody to getting that uplift actually making a meaningful difference on the ground in a community. But yeah, it's not a question from me so much as just a thank you to you and the G4S team that are currently dealing with the call handling, and your policing team that is dealing with response. But unless anybody else has got any questions they would like to ask, I'm content to move on. No, it looks like we're good to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And I'll just echo that point. Really, is yeah, we will make sure that we look after people as we move through the transition, and echo the thanks, because you know, the service in our control room is partnership with G4S and the response they had to this and throughout COVID, and the work that's been done to improve service there. And, you know, it's a huge thanks to G4S as well as the police side of the business. Okay, so if I move on to intervention, this is really around some of the work that goes on in terms of protecting people from vulnerability. I think the points I'd highlight here is that you can see in the past 12 months, in terms of section 136 under the Mental Health Act detainees, we're starting to see that rise. I don't think that should come as any surprise. The longer lockdown's gone on, we know there is more and more pressure around mental health services and more impact on individuals suffering with mental ill health. And given our role on the front line, I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing that starting to rise at the moment. On a positive point, the child sexual abuse is on the way down, certainly in terms of referrals and the exploitation part. I think my concern here would be whether those figures are actually the reality or whether they're just hidden by the fact that we are in lockdown, and some of those referral mechanisms may not be as robust during lockdown as they would be when we're operating under normal practices. So I do continue to watch that one carefully. I've touched on the mental health part and child sexual exploitation. The rape element, we've seen that reduced by 13%, as well as the recorded non-recent rapes. So these are ones that took place more than a year ago, and they're back to where we would expect the levels to be. But again, we've always got to factor in the current year and whether COVID is playing a part in that, which it undoubtedly will do. Hate crime is shown at the bottom of page 16. It's within the normal bounds of where we would expect them to be, but a decrease of 12%. But they did increase over the summer period, but are now back to where we'd expect them to be based on our 3-year average. But racial hate crime accounts for 64% of total recorded hate crimes over the last 12 months. In terms of process, you can see those figures around crimes attended and examined, positive identification from fingerprint and DNA recovered at 32.27%, slight decrease, but that's a pretty healthy return when you compare that to other forces and where we're at. And the stop and search figures are there there has been more proactivity around that during lockdown, because we've had a little bit of space and time to do that. And you can see an arrest rate sitting on a monthly average at the moment at just under 20%, and a slight decrease on the 12 monthly one at 16.35%. As I move through into the safeguarding bit on Chief's commentary in the paper at the bottom of page 17, you can see that there's been a focus on ensuring people at risk of harm are supported through our partnership working and the Safeguarding Children's Partnership and the Safeguarding Adults Board, as well as the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, and a continued focus on domestic abuse. And when we get to the court section, you'll see how that's played out in terms of prioritising court time around domestic abuse and making sure that we continue to look after those victims in that circumstance. We again recognise that a lot of referrals maybe haven't come through in the way we would want them to be, but we have seen increased victim referral numbers into EDAN, so the End Domestic Abuse Now, and that again is an area that we've prioritised, and that's a piece of work that's gone on about improving the referral mechanism into EDAN itself. So that's been a positive step change there. And the last part is really just about the COVID impact again, so I won't repeat what I've already said. So I'll pause there at the end of the interventions piece for any questions. Karen, the ACC, Karen Wilson would like to come in.
Just to add one point to the beginning of that, Chief, in relation to the child sexual abuse referrals, although the numbers have gone down from police referrals, what we have done over the time is work really strongly with partners and with schools, so that we're not getting the calls and putting those referrals in, just to give the assurance to the Commissioner that our partners, also schools and other agencies, are identifying those vulnerable families and working with those vulnerable families that we would potentially or ordinarily come into contact with.
Okay, thank you. So, Commissioner, that's the end of the intervention piece. I will pause unless you wish me to carry on.
No, I mean, just a couple of comments really from me. I mean, on the mental health piece, I mean, obviously we've been working across the OPCC and with the force to do significant amounts of work around mental health interventions, and that continues. One of the things that is particularly good to note, and I remember back when I started, the Section 136 detentions were almost identical to the number of people that ended up in custody, and the way that the force has changed processes internally, but also in that partnership space where we've been working together to work with health partners to change that. So when you look at Section 136 detainees over the 12-month period going 627, that's a significant increase on where it was. It was around 400 and something a few years ago, but to only have police custody used once in that period of time is an incredible result. And it's absolutely right that somebody with health requirements isn't being held in a police custody suite. I mean, that obviously isn't the right setting for somebody in health need, but it equally ties up police resources, and so I think that again is something to really celebrate, the fact that although there's a growing challenge around that mental health piece, the use of custody is something that's been really effectively sort of dealt with. And equally, I think, you know, you're right, some of the other issues we've had around hate crimes and sexual violence, domestic abuse are probably some of those areas we might see in the as lockdown is eased, and that'll be something obviously we'll need to keep an eye on. But in particular, we know that it's been getting things through court is and will remain a challenge, and obviously we'll continue to review that. But just more observations rather than anything, because these are obviously statements of what's happened rather than what you're going to do. We've heard about what more you're going to do, so I don't really want to rake over in any great detail about figures that go back several months before you were personally here, when we've been in such an unusual period of time with the COVID situation. I don't think that's necessarily of value, so I'm happy to move on.
Okay, thank you. DCC Jason Harwin just wants to come in on a couple of points, just for clarity, I think, and But the other point on the 136, the one person who did come into custody was actually in custody before being identified as 136. So had it been the other way around, they probably wouldn't have come into custody in the first place. So if I hand over to Jason, he'll just add a couple of points.
Thanks, Chief. And just again, Commissioner, hopefully you're well side on it. We've got to be realistic in terms of capacity around mental health provision from our partners. So as we know, they're always under pressure anyway, let alone the extra demand that's coming through the service. So there is work that we're doing across the partnership. Firstly, to see how we can be more early intervention, what can we do as organisations to support our people and the families of our people, because actually that reduces some of the demand going into core stream mental health related services. But also recognising again where there is opportunity across the partnership to bring, whether it be extra funding, extra resourcing, and including the volunteer use as well, how we can utilise that. So it's a good. I think we are in a good position in terms of a force. But again, being realistic going forward, we're likely to see some consequences of COVID for many years to come, and it's how we make sure we scale up and scale down at appropriate times to support that across the partnership. And that work is in play at the minute.
No, thank you for that. And I mean, obviously, the other thing I would point out is obviously that Deputy Harwin is leading on that piece of work around a new substance misuse strategy for Lincolnshire. And I think one of the areas that's often been very difficult is when you get people with a single diagnosis and also substance addictions and challenges, but also when you get dual diagnosis as well, and it becomes very difficult to actually work out who's going to take primacy across the services to actually offer that help, support, intervention. And often, all too often, it ends up with a person in crisis and police constantly being needed to support that individual. And I know that we'll all be working to try and deliver a more effective solution in a public health way, rather than it just falling to police all the time to be there to try and pick up pieces. You know, we need to support people better than that as a society. So it's great that we've got you, Jason, as the national lead for that for policing, and being able to lead on that for Lincolnshire. And I know myself and partners are looking forward to seeing, you know, the product that comes out of the other side and being able to deliver that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I'll move on to outcomes. So we're now on page 18, the top of page 18. The table at the top shows you the current position for the past 12 months, rolling 12 months. Although there's some red figures in there, I think what I'd say is that's a relatively healthy position given the COVID elements and factors that are built in. And we'll touch on some of the pressures that we've got around our courts in a moment. But particularly when we look at positive outcomes, 1 to 8, so charges, youth caution, adult caution taken into consideration, they're listed in the box of comments, but they're minor changes and nothing to be worried about. And actually, I think we could probably put all of that down to the COVID factor rather than any drop in performance. In terms of our custody, we've seen 9,744 arrests over the past 12 months. Arrest rate currently being at just under 20%, and within where we would expect it to be. And what we're seeing around our positive crime outcomes is there was a sharp increase in the number and percentage of positive outcomes due to proactive investigation recording against decreases in overall crime demand. So it allowed us the space and time to do that. And the percentage of positive incomes has now returned to a slightly lower level, although we still see some improvement in out of court disposal. What we're seeing is around about 2% of outcomes each month are finalised as out of court disposals. And I'll touch on some of the impact of COVID as we go through the next part. Page 19 shows you where our driving enforcement has been. You'll see peaks and troughs there as we go through initiatives, and a lot of the activity again is very much focused on the fatal flaws, so speed, phones, drink and drugs, and seat belts. And although we saw, as I said before, volume drop off in the first lockdown, it did pick up again in the summer months. And we then conducted various initiatives through November and December, which coincided with of Blackwater, which is the response to road safety. So you'll see the ticket numbers and the activity that's there at the top of page 20, and then a number of stats around firearms licensing thereafter. So there has and continues to be improvements in our positive outcome rates despite the pandemic, but there are challenges around the timeliness of cases heard at court. We do have backlogs in both magistrates and Crown Court, but both have been putting on additional court time, and there is partnership between magistrates and the Crown Court, where court space is being offered to the Crown Court. We have been prioritising domestic abuse cases, and speeding cases have been sitting, traffic cases, sorry, have been sitting on Saturdays at Loughborough. So there has been positive work around that. And I think as we come through the next 2 or 3 months, we'll start to see the pressures easing and that backlog starting to be brought back under control and moving forward. I've touched on the driving enforcement element, excuse me, but Operation Blackwater, as I mentioned, the enforcement of people driving under drink and drugs, with 139 people arrested, 62 for driving or being in charge of a vehicle while over the legal alcohol limit, and 77 for being impaired through drugs. We hope that many of those will lead to drivers being disqualified, but obviously that will then have a broader impact on their employment and their life in general. And we'll continue to support national campaigns as they come along. I will pause there at the end of that section for any questions before we move into satisfaction.
Thank you for that. And again, it you know, just looking at the firearms licensing, and I think back to where we started with that journey, being generally considered to be towards the bottom of the performing forces on that a few years ago, and it's been turned around totally by innovation and hard work by the team internally, to the point where, you know, we're not missing anything there, 100% across the board throughout the year of turning around people's certification on time, which is obviously helpful for the license holder, but helps keep us all safer across the whole county. So I think that's a great result. We know there are obviously issues with the criminal justice system generally and how it's coping. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was around with cases going into a backlog situation, particularly more serious cases. We know that sometimes analytical people have to go and give evidence and present things to court. Do we think that's building as a problem, both, I suppose, really as the force and as the region, regarding that the amount of time that suddenly people are going to have to spend in court versus the amount of time they're going to be spending doing the day job on the live investigations? Or do you think that there's sufficient bandwidth to cope with that?
I think from a victim point of view, there's obviously some pressures there, and if you look at victim care and case officer caseloads, they've definitely gone up over the past few months, and depending on how we can move through when we come out of lockdown and start to hear some of these cases and prioritise those that are either the highest priority of those with most vulnerability, will depend upon whether victims stay with us through the course of the next few months and maybe even into next year, where some of the more complex cases may actually still be pushed into. I think my main concern is less about the work that we have locally as a force, but it's more about the complex cases that might be delivered by our collaborations. And we've got to think about our analytical capability to support this, and making sure that we push for greater guilty pleas on the complex cases where we can, because that's what's going to take the pressure off the courts, because the complex cases generally have either multiple suspects or are so complex that they're going to need more court time, and therefore they tend not to take the court time up in the initial stages, because the pressure is on the numbers rather than complexity at the moment. I'm just going to check with my chief officer team whether there's anything else that wants to come in.
No, in terms of obviously more officers going to give evidence, I think it's a bit too early to say that at the minute, but it's going to be well closely monitoring it, aren't we? And again, working with the courts to make sure the officers attend when they need to, and if they can give evidence remotely, then we should be doing that remotely as well.
Okay, and as you know, Commissioner, there's quite a lot of work going on in the region with the CPS and with the courts to try and make sure that we do have resilience going forward. What we haven't seen yet is the opening of any Nightingale courts for the region, and that may be something that we want to continue to bring pressure to bear on to try and alleviate some of the backlogs that we've got.
Yeah, and I know that as regional forces and OPCCs, we're sort of keeping that pressure on through the Criminal Justice Board, and we'll continue to do that. But thank you.
Okay, are you happy to move on to satisfaction?
I am indeed.
Okay, so in terms of the satisfaction, at the top of page 22, you'll see the overall satisfaction figures currently sitting at 72% for the rolling 12 months. Kept informed is sitting at 57%, and the crime survey of England and Wales confidence levels at slightly higher figure at 77%. The domestic abuse satisfaction surveys for December were only undertaken for it says until the 22nd of December, so it's not a full month because of the lockdown commencing. So there's obviously some limited data there, and I'm just going to point that out. In terms of that user satisfaction, it's around the lower tolerance levels, so there is work to do as we come out of lockdown to try and pick that up again. And the kept informed satisfaction levels are sitting in a similar place of fluctuation within the normal bounds, but is showing a trend of slow decline there. And having gone through the strategy and the vision and where we want to be, that will be a key indicator around the quality of service and the care that we show to those people who need our help. So that will be an indicator we'll be watching. We'll hope to see that turning around in the coming months. Complaints shows a very slight and very slow increase there. Not overly concerned about that, because two things, they're being dealt with very well, and we are seeing quite a lot of restorative mediation, but also it indicates a confidence in reporting and a transparency and integrity in the way we deal with them. So in terms of commentary here, putting victims first is the approach to user satisfaction. There's a dedicated focus group now that meets bi-monthly to look at how we can help victims and support them and make sure that we are delivering the best service possible to our victims, making sure that we've got the training and that our victims have ready access to information and know what's going to happen next. We've developed a new website produced through Victim Links, and that helps and is the main referral and support service for all victims in Lincolnshire. What we have been doing as well through the satisfaction surveys is to make sure that we are feeding into our operational areas and making sure that our staff and officers are given feedback, highlighting both good practice and where we need to improve, so that we're picking up on the learning as we go through. In terms of user satisfaction, carrying on, the victim codes of practice have now been developed nationally. So the new codes, that is, they go live on the 1st of April. And this makes sure that we're supporting our victims throughout the court disposals and pushing restorative justice and making sure they're positively explored. And we'll be launching this internally and externally in the coming months. Complaints I've already touched on, and if you look at the final part of the Chief's commentary, 90% of allegations that were concluded, it was concluded that the service provided was acceptable, and that's after robust investigation and assessment. So I will pause at that point before I go on to the final part, which is about resources, which I will probably give to DCC Haward.
No, thank you for that. I think one of the key things for me around restorative justice in particular is that I still think there's some work for us to do together to raise the profile of what restorative justice is, certainly to the public at large, but also within the organisation of policing, because I think often I meet people that still believe that it is about a resolution outcome rather than the fact that the process of resolution will happen, and then the restorative justice is very much about the victim getting that closure and answers and everything else. So I think there is some, because I know previously language has changed around restorative justice, where it was seen as as part of resolving a dispute, if you like, and I think that's something that we need to do some work on. So I'll be looking to work with our provider on that, to do more, to actually provide some resources, to actually reach out to victims of crime who it might be the right solution for them, and that could well be a good training resource as well for officers to further understand the value and where it fits. So it's something that by no means am I criticising. I think it's just one of those things that we haven't really invested as much time and effort in creating a narrative around what we actually want from RJ and how we should go about exploring it. So it's just really to let you know that I'm sort of wanting to do more with that from my side, and equally I think that'll be a value for your officers as well.
Yeah, Commissioner, just on that, I think it's a view that we share, that we do need more training and investment in that. And just to give you some reassurance, we've just run a line managers CPD event where RJ was one of the topics of input to try and drive that understanding and better use of it in the future. I think DCC Haward would like to come in on this point, and then I might let him, if it's okay with you, let him run through into the resources part.
Yeah, so
Sure.
so just very quickly, Chief, so just to reinforce a bit, we are very aware of the issues around restorative justice. We're not getting the maximum benefit for victims. So again, very supportive, Commissioner, and as the Chief touched on, we have touched it on our line managers, against them to start feeding into their staff about how they could use it differently. The only bit I just want to cover on is the satisfaction piece, and I know in previous public assurance meetings we talked about bringing a paper back, because we are doing a significant amount of work around this to get this better. If it's with your support, Commissioner, we're very happy to bring in terms of focused area next time for the satisfaction piece that we're doing, because I think it is of really important to get this bit right. So I'm very happy to take that away and make sure we do that for the next meeting.
That's really welcome, thank you.
Okay, so into the final bit, and probably as always our most important asset, that's our people. And again, there's some good news story in this, taking account of the challenges we've had over the last 12 months with COVID. And again, as we have seen, certainly this last phase of the COVID situation, unfortunately more of our staff being subject to, whether it be directly or indirectly, to their family and friends as well. Overall attendance, and absence particularly, has declined, and whilst we've seen a slight increase as the report highlights, in terms of where we were previous 12-24 months, our levels is probably the lowest it's been for the force for a number of years. And that's particularly welcome when we look at the amount of resources that we've had available to us and the challenges as a county, which the Chief's articulated, continue to articulate, Commissioner, around our funding arrangements and the proportion of officers we get per population compared to elsewhere. Not just in terms of seeing the good news story from the reduction in absence from our workforce, but ultimately those that do return after a period of absence. Again, we've been maximising their use to get them back in operation as much as we can, whilst it may not be in their full duties, doing public order patrols, etc., but importantly supporting our calls of service. And again, doing that in a different way that ultimately means they can do it from their home addresses in some degrees, because we've now got technology to do it as well. So the important bit for us, and again, it's the challenge been set by the Chief, is how we take that practice further after COVID concludes, because actually it's creating a new way of working that actually is getting some real benefits. The individual member of staff that's getting back to work quicker, the fact that they're having a real purpose and actually playing value in terms of public service as well. But just importantly, let's be honest, reducing some of the cost on the organisation, because they don't need to travel and all the issues around our accommodation and everything else. So we will continue to do that piece of work, and importantly, as the deployable resources hopefully continue to increase with the uplift programme and your support around the bringing some of that programmes forward. Clearly, importantly for us is making sure we put the resource in the right place, which is part of our wider Horizons target operating model. That links in nicely to our recruitment. So again, as the report says in the Chief's commentary, we've recently done another recruitment process. Again, it highlights the interest in joining Lincolnshire Police, which is a good news story as a start. And then importantly highlights that we've had 338 new applications. And bearing in mind this new process brings in fast track for detectives as well. Those that are interested when they join us, that they're keen to become detectives if they can, if they've got the relevant skills and abilities very quickly in their service, which not only addresses the issues regarding some of our challenges around detective capacity in all forces in the country, but importantly recognises some of the skills those individuals will bring into the organisation and not have to go through the traditional spending significant amounts of time doing uniform roles when actually they've got a skill set there which actually gets better benefit for the individual, but importantly for the public. What this report doesn't say, and again, I know we've had conversations at the strategy boards, but also with the work that we've been doing to understand the barriers of Black, Asian, minority and ethnic communities, particularly our Eastern European communities, and also including female members of our communities, is that actually as a result of the work that's been doing, we're starting to see some green shoots in increasing those numbers actually applying to join the service. It is early, it's very early. The work that we're doing around understanding how we can get it better continues, but we are seeing in the most recent recruitment process them numbers have increased. The important bit is how we turn that into success at the other end and make sure, again, we're not creating barriers in the process that makes it some parts of our community at disadvantage, which is not what we want to do. We want to get the right people into the roles. So work in progress, again, very happy to get updates as we progress around that. And as the report says, we obviously are bringing in a new number of recruits very, very soon in March, which again, be very welcome. I know our frontline staff that's already out there doing our work, very much looking forward to them arriving. And importantly, as we do that, it will not just be new recruits, but obviously bringing in some transferees from other forces that helps us with some of our specialist capability, and firearms is always one where we always look for external recruits that can bring into that specialist area of work as well. So again, some good news stories within that. More work to do, as we know, around the recruiting, retention, development, and obviously the longer term piece around promotions as well. But the reality is there's green shoots there that we are hopefully from the work that we're doing will continue to grow into big trees and big forests.
No, thank you for that, and it's good to see all these different elements coming together. The work that you're doing around sort of diversity, inclusion, making sure that we're appealing to the right to every corner of Lincolnshire really to recruit from, but also then that really important piece you mentioned about retention and development, because I think that is really important. And I do think, just as a general comment, so not targeting at any particular cohort, that next element that I know that you'll be looking at around training need generally for the force to sort of make sure everybody's got the skills they need across the organisation will be a really key element, which obviously sits alongside any new recruitment, because it's important that people that are already in the organisation have got those opportunities to develop and progress. So you know, I know again that's another piece that currently sits in part in the G4S contract and something that you'll be looking at. But I think it's in good shape. We are recruiting, which is great. That's a good position to be in. But actually, there's a good level of confidence there that we're doing the right things to try and get the right mix to make sure that the force is representative. And I think that's really positive. Any other comments that you would wish to make, Chief or team, before we move on from this?
Nothing further from me or the team. They're all shaking their heads in the background, so nothing further.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you for your time. And obviously, as we move into new meeting rounds, then I'm sure you'll be presenting those further specific plans that we'll be able to look at in due course. But it's been really helpful to understand your strategy, and the fact that that's there, as I say, in the timely way that it's been to line up with budget setting has meant that we've had that confidence to be able to set the budget moving forward, which has been excellent. So with that, I think our next meeting is scheduled for June, which Aubrey, I don't know if you've got the date to hand.
Yeah, it's Monday the 14th of June.
So Monday the 14th of June is the next scheduled meeting, and other than that, it just remains for me to say thank you all for attending today. It's been really helpful, and just that concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much.